Welcome, U.S. history students. This is going to be a brief lecture regarding Chapter 2, 22, Section 5, which is the end of the Vietnam War. Okay, it'll be our last section of Chapter 22 and also help set you up for the week of beginning April 20th. Okay, so let's talk about President Nixon and the idea of Vietnamization. Okay, so the war had already started going back to 1964. We're already into the early 1970s. Okay. As you can see in the chart on the right hand side of your notes, that the number of soldiers had gone up tremendously to over 500,000 soldiers and then falls off a cliff basically by 1971, 1972. Okay. So there are negotiations that go on between the US and North Vietnam and Viet Cong, and they stall. They simply can't come to an agreement regarding several issues, such as should any North Vietnamese troops be in the South? What's going to happen immediately after the war? What's going to happen with the border? Is there going to be any U.S. involvement? So several different issues, okay? The National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, who has been there for many decades, right? A international scholar with several degrees from Harvard, I believe, okay? He basically comes up with this idea of Vietnamization, okay? It's the gradual withdrawal of troops in order for the South Vietnamese to take on a more active combat role. This is actually the same idea that's going on with Iraq right now. So the idea is that the Americans will help prepare the South Vietnamese troops to defend themselves against the Viet Cong and any communists that are attempting to take over South Vietnam. So it's a gradual withdrawal. Okay. So over a 3-year period, the soldiers dropped from over 500,000 to 25,000. Okay. Now, what was the goal? The goal was to end the war with peace with honor. It means have some type of long-term peaceful solution, and yet it look honorable, or I should say, yet the United States to look honorable to the rest of the world, as if we hadn't lost, as if we had not got the job accomplished. How do we make sure we're able to do both at the same time? To end the war peacefully, and yet the U.S. looking as if it came out ahead the whole time. Okay? We want to preserve American power at the negotiating table, because if we just give in to anything that the North Vietnamese want or the Viet Cong want, what's going to happen is it's going to ruin the United States' ability to negotiate not only with Vietnam, but with many other countries in the world if we look weak. Okay? And while these negotiations are going on, Nixon secretly orders a massive bombing on countries that are outside of South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Okay, let's go over that. So if we look at the map here, okay, with the pointer, here's Vietnam, right? Very skinny along the coast of the South China Sea. Okay, and at the time, North Vietnamese wanted to get supplies and weapons to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. Okay. So it's too dangerous to go all the way through Vietnam, right, due to American soldiers, okay? So we have the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So North Vietnam would go through Laos and go through Cambodia and then enter at various different points into South Vietnam. And this way they can hide from U.S. forces. In addition, the United States technically doesn't have any rights to go into the countries of Laos or Cambodia. They are foreign countries and they are not directly involved in the war, but they are being used by the North Vietnamese to get supplies. And they are not strong enough to stop the North Vietnamese as well. Okay? Now, so Nixon secretly says we're going to bomb all these places. And once you bomb these roads or the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that will force North Vietnam to, number one, not get any supplies to the South Vietnamese, to the Viet Cong, I should say, right? Or forced to find other routes, okay? But what he's doing is he's going to get the ire, which means maybe get other international countries upset because he is involving outside countries. And he's doing it secretly, doesn't want anyone to know. Now, this is what we call part of the madman theory. So at the same time, Nixon and Kissinger are negotiating with the North Vietnamese to end the war, he's bombing like crazy. Okay, and that's the madman theory. Nixon wants any country that he deals with to think that he is capable of doing anything at any time, that he is simply unpredictable. Okay, now there is major trouble on the home front. We've already discussed many of the reasons why Americans were upset with Vietnam, right? Number one, that people were being drafted, going against their will. Number two, that it was largely a war that people in poverty or people of color were fighting, and simply it wasn't any of our business. Also, that many Vietnamese civilians were dying as well, or simply because it was an unwinnable war. So Nixon says, hold on a minute. You may see all of these people protesting, but we're forgetting the silent majority. The majority of people are behind American efforts to stop the spread of communism in Vietnam. The majority of Americans are good, honest, hardworking people, and they are simply not out in the streets protesting, right? But who gets all of the publicity? The very small percentage of people that are rioting, that are protesting at colleges, in the streets, on foreign, against government buildings as well. Okay. Now, we have some events that are definitely going to turn the tide. So even if there was a silent majority, even if we estimate that the majority of Americans were in favor of the Vietnam War, we have these incidences which simply embarrass the United States. Okay, we have the My Lai massacre, which you'll read about, in which hundreds of innocent Vietnamese civilians were running away from American troops, did not have weapons, and were shot. Okay, many of them were shot in the back. It came out over a year later in a newspaper report. There was a large investigation done about it. Okay, and what ends up happening was many Americans were prosecuted for this, but only, I believe, the Lieutenant Calley, he was the one that actually spent some time in jail. Okay, and this greatly changed Americans' viewpoint because they were seeing this war for the first time on TV. They saw the pictures. People were lying about it, and they said, "God, you're killing women and children who are not directly involved in the war." Okay. Now, I also talked about Nixon earlier a little bit and about his secret bombing. Well, here Nixon is explaining it after denying it. Okay. And he, similar to the Tet Offensive, which was a major charge by the communists to attempt to attack all at one time several different American stations in Vietnam, right? Nixon was introducing what we call carpet bombing. And he did this all around Christmas time. Okay. Carpet bombing means that you bomb so much, you literally bomb each and every single square inch, right? As if you're covering the entire carpet. And so what this did is this, again, concerned American citizens and led to a large amount of rioting, a large amount of anxiety and stress, especially with the young people and especially at major colleges, right? Literally, though, throughout the country. Okay. Now, one major place that violence occurred was at Kent State University in Ohio. Okay. So the National Guard of Ohio was called out to quiet it down because the students were rioting at Kent State. And then next thing you know, what happens is a few of the students of Kent State are shot and killed. Okay. And we also see this as a turning of the tide moment because remember, now we're in the television age and we see pictures just as we do right here, which is perhaps one of the most famous pictures regarding the Vietnam War on the home front. So it continued to divide the nation in the early 70s, even while we're well on our way towards Vietnamization. Okay. Now, the Pentagon Papers. Okay. Basically, similar to the My Lai massacre, Americans find out later that the government is not completely telling us the truth, right? The Pentagon Papers was a massive expose. It was a nickname given to a massive study by the government regarding Americans' involvement in Vietnam. Okay. And what Americans learned is that these Pentagon Papers, this research, already stated the many issues that Americans American soldiers and the Army would have fighting a war against the Vietnamese. It also did not have an exact plan how to get out of the Vietnam War. So basically, we're fighting, but what really is the ultimate goal? And this was published in New York Times and so on. And so again, it's another blow to the sanctity, the respect of the U.S. government. Okay, so we have the My Lai massacre. Okay, we have the Pentagon Papers as well. Right, we have the shooting at Kent State, and then later on, we're going to talk about Watergate. So the early to mid 70s is quite a turbulent time in American history. Okay, so um, that's it for this part of chapter 22, section 5. We will go on and talk a little bit more about Vietnam and helping you prepare for a Vietnam DBQ. Talk to you later. Bye.